Well, my fellow video gaming enthusiast, game guru, master, whatever, got a few bit of different topics going on suddenly. It's good to see some activity on the channel, other than me and Rob, and my homage to Rob there, this hat. Although your hat was got much more mileage on it and/or character. Have you know, I bought this hat in 1985 when I turned 18, graduated from high school. It went with a jacket. I had a Indiana Jones thing going on at the time. The hat's actually weathered far much. You can see the dust on it. Shows you how often I get it out. It's weathered the time much better than the jacket. The jacket's sitting in our storage locker in a desperate need of some TLC, mostly in the form of some good leather oils to get it back to its functionality, because it's just too brittle right now to wear. It somehow or another got jammed out into the stuff that was stuck out in my mom's barn, and the weather got to parts of it. So it is what it is. On the topic of gamers jail kind of thing, there are rules, and then there are rules, and there are places and situations where it's not always conducive. I know for gaming, I know a buddy of mine who went into the service, and he just didn't have the locker space to have a lot of stuff, and in some aspects, he wasn't allowed to have any of it because it was not conducive to the situation he was in. That different when he was at a base and stuff, but not so much when he was on field duty. So he had to improvise. And then I've got associates who have done time in prison, and they tell you that it varies. In Iowa, they have no problems with you playing a game like Star Wars, but D&D, they think it's antisocial. I don't know. It's just, you could buy the books, you can own the books, you can have them in your possession, you're just not allowed to play them. It's a strange set of mechanic or rules and conflicting rules. I like the idea on the coins. I heard something to that effect long ago regarding using loose change in lieu of dice. The one that I'm most familiar with is using a deck of cards. A deck of cards, if you take and discard all your face cards, your king, your queen, and your jack, keep the ace. Now you have a 1 to 10 and black and a red. So you can designate black the 10s and the red the 1s, and now you have your mechanics you need to make a percentage roll. And if you were to get what I have used in the past is 2 or 3 decks of cards and stack together. That way I didn't have to keep shuffling between each roll. You'd make 2 or 3 rolls, shuffle your deck, make 2 or 3 rolls, shuffle your deck, because you've got multiple sets of percentages there. In the same aspect, you can do the same thing with the cards for pretty much every dice denomination there is. 1 through 6, 1 through 10, 1 through 8, 1 through 4. And you just have multiple sets of them together, so you don't have you're decreasing the chance of getting into that favored system. Now, in a second bar topic, one that just recently come up, I saw Antoine's original video on the value of playing rules-heavy games, or games that have a very robust set of mechanics and or storyline behind them. And while Mr. Bradley doesn't always, in his opinion, it's not necessarily conducive to play in his opinion and his belief in things, which is, hey, I get it, I understand it. It's not for everybody, and yeah, I'm not advocating that everybody should. It's a must. That you must do this. You must have it. Although I have to say that we all dealt with it to some degree. If you're old enough, you grow up. The rules became more and more convoluted, more and more detailed as time went on, until we reached some point in the mid-90s when there was a different revolution on the take on rules, and we were at that point streamlining and changing the verbiage, the way it's approached. We eliminated. You see that in later versions of D&D as an example, where they condensed a lot of the skill sets. Instead of having 50 skills, they took a lot of the skills, 4 or 5 skills that are in the same kind of category, condensed them under one heading, and then emphasize that in the description on them. So if you wanted to do this or this, you just roll the same skill, which condensed things, made it more pliable. Then there's the rule systems like Space Opera that's very, very clear about it from the very beginning. It says utilize what you need. You know, once again, if you want a simplistic game system or a game, you don't need to apply a lot of these secondary sets of rules, and that applies in every game system. I think you all know what I'm talking about. Pretty much every game system out there, except ones that are very slender to begin with, have a lot of additional stuff that can be glazed over, can be ignored altogether. We don't need to worry about things like encumbrance and endurance and weather, stuff like that. If it's nothing you want to worry about, then you just by all means ignore that section of rules or that chapter on the rules. When you talk about weapons, well, I've played game systems where there's very detailed weapon rules for individual categories of weapons, for individual weapons themselves. And then I've played in game systems where they pretty much lumped them all into categories. So a polearm is a polearm, doesn't matter the differences. Although anybody who knows anything about weapons know that's absolutely absurd. Size, length, purpose, it all matters. So the same argument, swords and categories, we based them by size. Well, there's a lot of swords, and then there were a lot of specialty swords, and there were specific swords for specific time periods, so forth, so on and so on. So you want to simplify things, you got a short sword, long sword, that's it. Even when I gave them simpler, just a sword. There you go. An axe is an axe is an axe, except a battle axe, a long-handled axe, a headman's axe, a hand axe, a throwing axe. Each has a set of parameters, makes a different set of stuff. Okay. Now, we talk about, rule set. Sometimes a game book's rules seems rule heavy because it's trying to address as many possible scenarios or desired effects by its players. Some make the assumption that there's going to be a need for this information or that information. Now, many game systems have gotten around this by issuing not one massive tome, but multiple books with different sets of sections that apply to certain scenarios. This is where the traditional, as we've said before, just the D&D thing comes out. You got the GM guide, and we got the player handbook and a monster manual. If you've got those 3 books, you don't need anything else. Everything else is extra material, extra sources and fluff, or what have you. Everything else is encapsulated in those 3 books. On the other hand, if you were to go through those 3 books, in those books are numerous subcategories of things that could be pared down or eliminated if you choose. You don't have to have 5 variations of a fighter. A fighter is a fighter is a fighter. If you want a fighter specialist, he utilizes his feats and skills as we did in the day, to form what we wanted our character to conform to. And we've seen game systems that have no character classes. They have a generic set of rules and abilities and so on and so forth, and you custom make whatever it is you're attempting to do. And so you get this either a good mix from somebody who's experienced and has had time to play through this system several times and learn the nuances, or we get these jack of all trades that either are mediocre at everything or exceptionally talented at 1 or 2 things and then mediocre at everything else. That is part of the nature of those style game systems. So I wanted to talk about the one that I've spent a decade working on and hoping to see in print sometime in the next few years, assuming the so-called contract I have actually pans out and is a contract. It's hard to have signed something like this and then have it sit on a shelf for a long period of time and not even hear anything from the people who were so enthusiastic at the very beginning. I try to remind myself to be patient. It's hard to be patient, right? But I figure you don't want to hear me going into a 40 or 50 minute long video, so I'm going to do 2 of them. And before I do that, I went out and I acquired a new camera on the cheap. Fairly, hopefully it's going to work the way I plan on it. I got a little rig I'm going to set up, try to do the table version of an overview, and my attempts of using my cell phone doing that. A cell phone burns when I upload from my cell phone. It uses a lot of HD, and more than my laptop does for some reason. And B, as you can know, if you get this kind of really narrow picture, a lot of wasted picture space that I don't know. It's doable, it's usable in certain scenarios, but not so much when you're trying to show people what you're talking about. Like I said, I believe that that's what everybody wants. And when they see a quote review of something, they want to see something that's dealing with where they can get a good look at it, as opposed to watching the guy talk about it, which is what they did for the first 40 or 50 of the ones I did. All my Murph were that way, and I'm not going to sit there and say I'm going to go back and redo them all. Who knows? Some years from now, after I've worked through everything I want to do, I might go back and revisit those and update them in a better format. But that's just, I'm learning, and a lot of what I'm learning is from you guys. I'm listening, I'm viewing, I'm watching, I'm seeing what you're doing, how you're doing it, how you're applying it, your opinions, your educated assumptions, and your knowledge. And as I said in that previous video that I posted, if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have a stack of books to pull on, you use what you know up here. And the more we've read, the more we've invested in things, the more we've become immersed in things, the more we retain that information and we can use it on the fly. So it's plausible to run a game or a small campaign or a game with nothing but, pen and paper, nothing but this, because the lion's share of what we need is up here. And as long as your players are on board with it, because there'll always be those who are more comfortable with having that physical thing in front of them that allows them to go and make sure that you're saying what you're saying is the truth, because our memory is never perfect, and sometimes we can say one day this is how it goes, and 3 weeks later we say, well, it goes quite like this, and then they say, well, wait a minute, we've been doing it like that, and you got to go either debate it or reverse it to the original. And that's where I got started in writing things down in shorthand and notes to remind myself. At the first opportunities, I ordered some books, and then, of course, the guys would move away, or the guys would have the books, and then things moved, changed, and we didn't have what we started out with. We're back to ground zero. It was just not plausible, not acceptable to take all the stuff I had. In the day, whenever I went someplace, I used to carry a metal box about yay big with most of my core material for the given game that we were going to play. That way I had it with me. But sometimes you find yourself, a long way from your stuff. And it's short of going out and buying a whole bunch of new stuff or replacement stuff, you either make do or buy something else. Modern era, we all go play the video games and stuff, right? My laptop's getting a small collection of those things. So, on the other hand, there's something to be said about these things. That's why I like Antoine's video talking about looking at things from a wider world perspective. Both because we learn more from games that have more depth to them, more sets of rules, more options. We learn that we have options. We also learn the value between these options and these options. So this set of rules and this set of rules are completely different from each other, but there's value within both of them. And the knowledge we gain from having had both adds up, right? You know that. I won't preach to you guys. So there's that. There's my nickel's worth. Stick tuned. We'll work on this next one here shortly. So you should see a double whammy with me here in the next few hours. And work with me or bear with me or ignore it. It's all on you, right? Meanwhile, I really do enjoy the interaction with you guys. A lot of thoughtful stuff. Rob, you're in Wisconsin. You're not too far from Iowa. Just saying.